Now, in your assessment of the White House intelligence report, which was published on Tuesday, you said that there's no evidence whatsoever that the United States government had concrete knowledge that the government of Syria was the source of the chemical attack. And at the end of the report, you actually said that the situation here is the White House has issued an obviously false, misleading, and amateurish intelligence report. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, when you look at the White House report, it cites physical evidence. It talks about a crater where it claims there is a munition. Well, as it turns out, I have been studying this particular possibility for quite a while. And my conclusion is that if this is a real crater, remember that there is a lot of tampering with evidence. But if I accept the White House claim, which is that the evidence is real, then the munition that they're talking about was not dropped from an airplane. It was put on the ground, and it was some kind of improvised dispersal munition. And in my report, I show roughly what this munition would have had to look like, again, assuming that the evidence was not tampered with. Now, that's not my assumption, I want to underscore. That's the White House assumption. So on many levels, the White House report really doesn't meet, quite frankly, the laugh test. It assumes that this photographic evidence was not tampered with, which I think is a long way, is a big assumption. It then misinterprets the photographic evidence and comes to a conclusion that is the opposite of what they're claiming. And speaking as an American citizen, I must say I want to know who signed off on this report. I think that this report was almost certainly politically motivated. My personal guess, my guess is that there is no intelligence officer in the United States service who's worth anything in terms of their reputation who would have signed off on this report.
Professor, how exactly have you arrived at the conclusion that the munition could not have been dropped from the sky, but rather exploded on the ground?
When you look at the munition, it's a piece of pipe that is typically used to manufacture artillery rockets. So we know what this pipe looks like. It looks like it was probably sealed at two ends. So it's kind of like a container, a cylindrical container. And it looks like it was placed flat on the ground, and an explosive charge was placed on top of it. So the effect of the explosive charge was to crush the container from the side. Because when you look at the photograph, you can see that the pipe has been crushed from the side. A munition from the sky might look like a spherical, it could look like anything, but it could be, let's say it's a spherical container. And in the middle of the container, it might have a small explosive charge. And the small explosive charge would rupture, would create a violent internal increase in the pressure. And the surrounding material, which would be sarin in this case, would get forced against the walls, and the container would fracture, and the sarin would splay out into creating an aerosol. Now, in this case, you can see without any ambiguity that this device was crushed from the outside in. I think this is likely a staged situation, but I'm not making the claim. The White House is claiming that this crater is evidence. I'm saying that if this crater is evidence, then it's not the evidence the White House claims it is.
Professor, you also said in your assessment of this report that this draws the analogies back to 2013 when the accusations against the Assad government of using chemical weapons in Ghouta attack, killing more than 100 people. You were actually investigating 2013 incident as well and came to a conclusion that the U.S. intelligence may have been wrong there again. Can you specify what kind of analogies that we're dealing with here?
I think this is an indication that there is something extremely problematic in the American national system with regard to the use of intelligence. This particular report is in some ways exactly parallel to the report that occurred in the Obama administration. Factual claims that could not be true. Let me give you an example. They claimed that the American infrared satellites saw the launch and impact of the sarin munitions that were used in that attack. That is not possible. The American infrared satellites are very good, and they could certainly see the launch of a rocket, but they could not tell where the rocket landed because there was no explosion when the rocket landed. They would only be able to see the flash from an explosion. So this is overtly wrong. And no intelligence, I want to underscore, no American intelligence expert who knows anything about their business would have argued that this data was available. So that was fabricated. But what it indicates is a willingness on the part of high-level people in the White House to distort, to use intelligence claims that are false to make political points and political arguments. And this is a serious, intolerable situation.
Professor, I covered the G20 summit back in 2013 when Obama came to St. Petersburg in Russia to rally support for a possible ground invasion in Syria. And then the premise was the alleged attack by Assad government on Ghouta, the chemical attack. Now as you're saying, we're facing a very similar situation. Do you think it can actually go into investigation on the ground, something that Moscow has been demanding?
What I think a rational approach would be for there to be two investigations. There should be an international investigation, probably under the UN, since both the Russian and American sides have at some level vested interests, but some organization like the UN, where of course the Russian and Americans can provide their input and their arguments. And then there needs to be a second investigation. This would be an American investigation. And we need an investigation into how such a false intelligence report could be generated at the highest levels of our government. This is very serious. This confrontation with Russia has some potential to escalate, and if it's escalating over false intelligence claims, that is very serious. And in addition, I would argue that such an investigation of this report should also include a complete investigation of what happened when Obama was initially misled into thinking that there was an attack by the Assad government. We know that Obama was told, after he initially believed it was the Assad government, he was told that it was not necessarily the case. So he was initially given incorrect intelligence, and then it was corrected, although the public was never told about this.